Today, another proposal that the Treasury is reported to be looking at to claw back, in this case, £2 billion of that £50 billion. And the idea is this. The idea is putting up taxes once again on landlords by applying national insurance, which landlords don't currently have to pay on their rental income, to the money that they make by renting out their properties. That would see them pay at least another 8% more in national insurance and bring in for the Treasury about £2 billion. Now, I've got to be honest with you, when it comes to landlords and taxes and what they have to pay, I generally take the approach of there is no violin tiny enough to be played. When landlords get in touch, as they often do, and say, it's so unfair, woe is us, all we did was buy 20 houses and now we're having to pay a little bit more tax on the thousands and thousands of pounds of profit we're making. It's absolutely disgraceful and so on. But I actually, on this one, I'm going to do something I wouldn't normally do. I'm going to stand up for Britain's landlords because I do think this is a ridiculous idea. Rachel Reeves, it seems to me, once again, if she does this, and it is an if, will have proved that she struggled to see more than about 2 inches in front of her face when it comes to the impact that her policies are going to have. Remember last year how she jacked up taxes on loads of small businesses and then seemed a bit surprised when those businesses passed on the increase to customers and we all had to pay more for our weekly food shop or our pints or whatever it was that we were paying for. Inflation's gone up in no small part because Rachel Reeves jacked up taxes on small businesses. It's going to be exactly the same if she now increases taxes on landlords, isn't it? Joe is a spokesperson for the London Renters Union. Joe, very good afternoon to you. What are your thoughts on this? Is taxing landlords more something you'd like the Chancellor to do?
Well, look, this very specific tax, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Ben, and talking about the interests of renters, but as a renter and as someone who works, I pay national insurance. So why shouldn't my landlord pay national insurance? You know, renters who make up, you know, the people who keep our country going, keep our cities going, the bus drivers, the nurses, they're all going out, they're working hard and they're paying national insurance. So why should there be a loophole which prevents landlords from paying national insurance? It's the same with money that you earn from stocks and shares and investing. It seems that the richer that you are in this country, the less likely you are to have to pay tax. So simply put, it's completely unfair that renters would pay national insurance, but the person who owns their home wouldn't. So,
but in practice, Joe, surely renters are going to end up paying even more national insurance because the landlords will pass on the tax hike to renters by jacking up their rents to cover the cost. That's what landlords run businesses effectively. That's what businesses do. That's what businesses did when national insurance that they pay went up. They passed on the cost to customers, and landlords will do the same. It's renters that will suffer, surely.
Look, we've got a private rented sector in this country that is completely broken. It's doubled in size and it's broken at the same time, you know, like it used to be a place primarily for students, temporary workers and stuff like that. And now it's full of families and old people for all of their lives. And it's a pretty poor place to live for a lot of those people. And right at the bottom, it's a terrible place to live. It's the most expensive form of housing and incredibly, even by European standards, it's the most expensive. And security, how can you build a life?
But Joe, this is my point, that the people who are currently already paying eye-watering amounts of money for often rubbish accommodation, if Rachel Reeves does this, and it is an if for now, will end up paying even more. That's why I think it's a terrible idea.
But we need to fix it, Ben. And if we're scared of doing anything which will damage a landlord's business model, we're not. The government is not going to have the courage.
But my fear isn't for the landlords; it's for the tenants who will end up paying. Why, as the spokesperson of the London Renters Union, would you want tenants to pay more?
We don't want tenants to pay more, and that's why we need to tax landlords fairly, and we also need to introduce rent controls, because when we had rent controls in this country and when they have rent controls in other countries, you can stop landlords passing on the higher costs of tax, passing on the levelling the playing field.
Sure.
So you need to introduce tax changes like this and then control rent.
But we don't have rent controls in this country, and as far as I'm aware, there's no proposal from the Labour government to introduce them. So until we do, what will happen, surely you agree, is that landlords will just pass on this tax increase to tenants. How does taxing landlords more if we don't have rent controls? How does that help tenants?
Look, rent controls are not the only solution to the housing crisis, but they are absolutely central solution to the housing crisis. We can't not talk about this, but we also can't. But the
government isn't talking about it. We're not going to have rent controls. So what will happen in practice is that landlords will pass on this tax to tenants. And I ask again, how does taxing landlords more if we don't have rent controls? How does that help private renters?
We need to completely change the way that the system works with housing. Landlords have had a lot of tax breaks, and the last government removed some of those tax breaks. The argument you're making, we would never have removed any of those tax breaks, and landlordism in this country would remain one of the most profitable ways of putting your money it's possible to imagine. Governments have slowly grown in courage that they're like, look, it can't be such an easy racket, especially when it's something as important as housing. And so tax changes like this are important in leveling the playing field.
How do they level the playing field? How do they help tenants? They make life worse for tenants because more landlords sell up, there's fewer homes available for rent, and now if they don't sell up, they will be passing this on to tenants. So it's a double whammy for tenants.
We used to have a private rented sector, which was about 10% of the population. It's now about 20% of the population. That's because it's grown. What you're saying, Ben, makes it sound like you want the private rented sector to grow.
No, I want people to be able to afford homes, Joe.
To grow.
What I want is more people to be able to afford homes. But we don't have that right now. And so until we do, lots of those people who can't afford to buy homes will have to rent privately. Given that is the case, I want them to pay as little as possible, not have to cover their landlord's tax hike as every opportunity.
When a landlord chooses to sell because the playing field has been levelled, what happens? Well, they sell that home. And who buys it? Well, if another landlord doesn't buy it, a first-time buyer might buy it. The reason that homeowners...
Only if they can afford it, which millions of young people can't right now.
Millions of young people can't. But if we see a steady reduction in the size of the private rented sector and Labour's ambitions on house building, then that means we have more people in home ownership. And, this is going to raise $2 billion in tax. And what could they spend some of that $2 billion in tax? The way of providing secure and affordable homes for people on lower incomes, which is social housing. They've sold off 1 million social homes in recent years in this country. If we instead start to rebuild our housing stock like this government has set social housing stock like this government has said it's going to do, then lower income people will have to rely less on the private rented sector and can access security and affordability through social housing. We can't just be scared of the landlords. We have to tackle the problem that has grown over the last 40 years because of a lack of courage and the fact that 100 MPs earn more than 10 grand a year as a landlord. This is a landlord. It's a government. We've had a succession of governments.
I don't disagree with you at all about the importance of building affordable housing. But you've got to do that first. If you just start taxing landlords now before those homes have been built, people will be priced out of renting and they won't have anywhere to go because the affordable homes you're talking about are not going to be built for a number of years.
And there's a very clear solution to that, which is rent controls. So we control rents. Rents have gone up 20%, more than 20% in the last 3 years in this country. If we had rent controls, my rents would be 20% on average cheaper.
I hear you completely.
That would make the difference. That's why rent controls absolutely central to solving the housing crisis.
I hear you completely, and yet the Labour government is not going to do that. They've been pretty clear on that.